Hi, my name is Steffi Coates, and I am a current junior at Davidson College, a small liberal arts college located outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. I am a double major pursuing a degree both in biology and German studies. I've had the absolute privilege of working with Dr. Fraser-Raff for every single semester at Davidson and Dr. Pena just this semester in the course German 351 titled Race, Gender, and Migration. This course has covered a lot of different avenues, such as identity, the meaning of citizenship, representation, and current events. Throughout this course, I've been introduced to the BGHRA, the Black German Heritage Research Association, and countless inspiring guest speakers. Without the mentorship and leadership from both Dr. Fraser-Raff and Dr. Pena, and the support of the BGHRA, this project would not be possible. So thank you all. I decided to wrap this course up with presenting on the topic of adoption and specific transnational adoption. To be honest, I knew absolutely nothing about this topic before starting this course, and I assume that there are many others like me who have not even thought twice about transnational adoption or perhaps not even heard the term. The purpose of my presentation is to educate myself and to hopefully you guys will learn a thing or two and your interest will be sparked to research on your own. Before I start, I want to thank Dr. Pena and Dr. Fraser-Raff for their support throughout the semester. Okay, so hopefully I won't bore you guys too much throughout my presentation, but let's hope not. First, I want to start off by going through important terms that I'll be using throughout this presentation, go on to a quick history of an adoption, and share a timeline, speak about reculturation and multiculturalism, a term that is becoming more prevalent, and then I'll go on to data that presents both positive and negative aspects of adoption. And lastly, but certainly not least, I would like to sprinkle in a few quotes from Dr. Pena, the president of the BGHRA, who is also an adoptee, and she agreed to share her experiences with me. Thank you so much for allowing me to share your experiences, Dr. Pena, and for allowing me to pick your brain in an interview. I want to preface that adoption and transnational adoption is a massive topic to tackle. I had to pick and choose subtopics that I found interesting and important. I barely scratched the surface when researching, so I encourage you guys to do more research. These are the important terms that I will be using quite a bit during my presentation. First off, transnational adoption is defined as an international adoption in which an individual or couple becomes the legal parent of a child who is a national of a different country. Transracial adoption refers to the adoption of a child of one race by a parent or parents of a different race of that child. International adoption involves crossing borders and invokes space and geography as adoptive parents imagine distant countries. The children are moved from one nation to another. Enculturation is a term that I've never heard about, but I'm grateful through this project I've been introduced to this term. Enculturation is the lifelong development and awareness and understanding of one's birth culture. Reculturation will be a big topic throughout this presentation. Reculturation is the process of identity development and navigation through which adoptees develop their relationship to their birth and adoptive countries. Multiculturalism has become a thematic mainstay in the field of international adoption. Multiculturalism is loosely defined as acknowledging other cultures within a dominant political culture. Adoption has been a major topic in the legal realm over the last recent years, and a lot of alterations have been made over the years. This information that I'm about to share all comes from the scholarly article, Natural Born Aliens, authored by Elena Kim and Kim Park Nelson. Presenting a timeline is important because adoptee deportation in the last decade uncovers the tension and adoptee progressive embrace of immigrant identity. This scholarly article tells the story of Amy Kim, who was adopted to Minnesota in the late 1970s at the age of 2. Miss Kim was never naturalized by her parents, and her green card expired when she turned 18 years old, leaving her undocumented. In 1992, she voted in the presidential election at the age of 18 and inadvertently committed a felony. I believe it is not common knowledge that this could occur to an adoptee. Therefore, I believe education is the most powerful tool we have to raise awareness. In 1955, an act for the relief of certain Korean War orphans was unanimously passed in both houses. This act governed international adoption at the time, mostly only applying to post-war Korea, and permitted a maximum of 2 children per American family. Harry Holt traveled to Korea and wanted to bring the security and comfort of America to the Korean children. Under this act, children were permitted to enter the US not as refugees, but allowed them to enter as natural-born alien children, a term that remains problematic. Transnational adoption to the US began after World War II as a humanitarian effort to resettle displaced children from Britain, Japan, Germany, Greece, and Italy. In 1961, Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952 was amended to include inter-country adoption as a permanent category in the US immigration law. Before this, children from Asia could only enter the country under the same terms of the Temporary Refugee Act. In 1961, Public Law 87301 was passed. This was passed to create the orphan visa as a permanent instrument with the sole purpose of allowing foreign children to enter the US for the purpose of adoption. An important note is that after this visa was approved, federal agent exclusion law had been repealed. In 1961, the amended INA was inspired by social workers who argued that children from foreign countries faced additional challenges in terms of language, cultural adjustment, and racial difference. They would be vulnerable to abuse, neglect, or abandonment without oversight. Therefore, in 1961, legislation explicitly stated that children adopted from overseas must be observed by the adopting petitioner and spouse prior to or during the adoption proceedings. During the amended 1961 INA Act, a child would be legally relinquished by her or his biological parents and rendered a paper orphan in the sending country, meaning the child would be referred to prospective parents who had been approved by passing a criminal background check and a home study. The parent would then be recognized as an immediate relative who could be granted an orphan visa. The child would enter the US as a legal permanent resident, but the adoption would not be finalized for at least 6 months or up to a year due to the children welfare laws. After 2 years, the child would be allowed to apply for US citizenship. In 1978, yet there was another amendment. Parents wanted to change the laws that mandated the 2-year wait between the adoption and application for citizenship, as it was causing hardships for parents as they registered their children for school and identity crisis. The government stated that the 2-year naturalization waiting period was designed to allow illegal adoptions to be reversed if needed, such that children could be returned to their birth countries. Both the contested requirements were removed, allowing parents to file for naturalization immediately and to apply for an unlimited number of orphan visas. 1996, the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act was passed. It was passed in response to the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, which made it easier to deport immigrants convicted of crimes. Legal scholar Nancy Morowitz writes in reference to the IIRIRA with respect to transnational adoptees. No one imagines that any of these children will engage in crimes, but crime is a statistical certainty with any group. For immigration law to treat adoptees as strangers because of criminal convictions disrespects the fundamental commitment that adoptive parents made to their foreign-born adopted children. She stated this hopefully to make a change. Between 1910 and 1980, the United States has processed about 56,000 deportations as a result of criminal convictions. It only took 3 years after the passage of this act for the first adoptees to be deported. In 2000, the Child Citizenship Act was passed. The goal of this act was to close the gap between kinship and citizenship. It allowed for foreign-born, biological, and adopted children to acquire US citizenship before the age of 18. In 2010, transnational adoptee organizations formed. These organizations formed in response to the growing problem of adoptee deportation. They advocated for policy change to provide citizenship for all of the US transnational adoptees who did not currently have citizenship. In 2016, the Adoptee Citizenship Act was passed. This bill amends the Immigration and Nationality Act to grant automatic citizenship to qualifying children adopted by US parents, regardless of the date which their adoption was finalized. It is very clear that still a lot of changes need to be made to decrease the challenges within transnational adoption. Not only do adoptees and parents struggle legally, but as Ms. Kim stated after her adoption, I actually feel like my current status is not exactly as a Korean citizen and not exactly as a US citizen. It actually fits my identity, how I feel about myself. This leads directly into the next topic of reculturation. And reculturation is very prevalent among adoptees. A lot of adoptees struggle with their identity. This is where the idea of reculturalization comes up. Reculturation is a process of identity development and navigation through which adoptees develop their relationship to their birth and adoptive cultures via reculturative activities and experiences. This process can be active or it can be passive and is initiated by the adoptees themselves, not their adoptive parents. In short terms, reculturation is reclaiming of one's birth culture. And there are various triggers or life events that can initiate this process. In the previously mentioned scholarly article, a common described trigger is that adoptees can no longer pass as the honorary white child, and reculturation becomes an adoptive coping mechanism. Examples of reculturation include education, language courses, heritage tours, study abroad experiences, and interactions with birth cultures. But that is not limited to the listed activities. When I spoke with Dr. Pena, the president of the BGHRA, and my professor, who agreed to be interviewed for my project, she shared that she was adopted from Mannheim, Germany, and was adopted by a military couple. The Black German Cultural Society was a Yahoo group that she decided to join, and it really helped her find her identity. She stated that finding a community and finding people like her was incredibly helpful to finding oneself. Another important term that is addressed a lot within the topic of a transnational adoption is enculturation. This is another term that comes up in scholarly journal articles as it goes hand in hand with reculturation. Enculturation is the development of awareness and understanding of one's birth culture. Education, experience, and immersion are key factors in enculturation. It can be incredibly difficult for children to assimilate to their parents' culture. As I mentioned earlier, multiculturalism has become a thematic mainstay in this field. Under the new presidency, multiculturalism and anti-racism has become more celebrated, but it can also result in a stratified country as we know how many individuals and groups do not agree. The United States and Germany both have flawed approaches to multiculturalism, which hinders adoptees' building of individual national identity. This is another topic that will be discussed later in the presentation, but I believe that interviewing and personal experiences are an excellent way to be educated. The failed approach and unfortunate negative views to multiculturalism has led to a study being conducted about the positive and negative aspects of transnational adoption. As I mentioned earlier, I am a bio major, so I like my statistics, and I'm very into concrete data, although we must take into account that every adoptee's experience is very different. Therefore, we can analyze this data, but we should also remember that this is not only evidence to base our views on. As I stated earlier, personal experiences count more than any data ever could. In 2016, a study was conducted on the positive and negative aspects of transracial adoption. An exploratory study was published from Danielle Guden de Catau. This study included 71 women and 21 men who were born in South Korea and were adopted by 2 white parents. More than half of the participants mentioned dealing with prejudice, racism, and discrimination. Once again, more than half the participants stated that they faced issues related to not fitting in. 29% reported struggling with the question, "Who am I?" Although not all reported comments were negative, some participants mentioned that straddling 2 cultures and racial groups enhanced their learning and awareness about the world and enabled them to be bicultural and flexible. I know Dr. Pena mentioned having some experience with this. Some even spoke about developing personal attributes or skills, including compassion, adaptability, oh my gosh, that is a mouthful, and self-awareness. I really enjoyed creating this project and learning about this topic that I knew so little about. And I want to continue researching and conducting further interviews that I hope to share on the website at a later date. One last time, I want to thank Dr. Pena for all her help, sharing her resources, sharing her personal experiences, and being the driving force in this project. Thank you all for your attention, and over and out.